The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Cream-colored envelope, embossed HOA seal in the top left corner, the kind of stationery people buy when they want you to know they take themselves seriously. I set my coffee down on the porch railing, leaned against the old cedar post, and read it slowly. Once, twice, 3 times, while the windmill behind me turned in lazy circles, its familiar metallic whisper cutting through the morning quiet. You are hereby ordered to remove the unauthorized structure identified as a wind power mechanical apparatus from your property within 30 days of this notice. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $150, legal action, and potential forced removal at the homeowner's expense. It was signed, Patricia Elaine Cromwell, President, Sycamore Ridge Homeowners Association. I folded the letter, tucked it back into the envelope, set beside my coffee cup. Then I smiled, because Patricia Cromwell had no idea what she'd just done. Let me tell you about my property before I tell you about my war, because the land is where this story lives and breathes. I bought the 1.5 acres at the end of Sycamore Ridge Court 18 years ago, back when the development was still being carved out of old farm country. The previous owner was a man named Harold Briggs, 72 years old, leathery hands, the kind of quiet dignity you only find in people who've spent their lives working soil. Harold sold me the land at a fair price with one condition: that I maintain the windmill. Not a decorative windmill. Not the quaint little Dutch things you see in garden centers. This was a working air motor water pump, steel frame standing 42 feet above the ground, still factory original for 1987, bolted into a concrete foundation that Harold had poured himself. Below, it ran a well casing that dropped 214 feet into the Ogallala Aquifer, one of the deepest and most reliable water sources in the county. Here's what Harold knew, and what the HOA apparently never bothered to research. When Sycamore Ridge was developed in 2001, the developer, a company called Meridian Homes, LLC, had negotiated an easement with Harold's estate. In exchange for permission to run utility infrastructure across the back edge of the property, Meridian had connected 6 homes on the cul-de-sac to Harold's well as a secondary water source. It was a cost-cutting measure. Instead of running expensive municipal lines all the way to the end of the court, they'd tapped a source that was already there, already proven, already deep. The windmill pumped the water. The well held the water. 6 households drank it, bathed in it, watered their lawns with it. This was all in the deed, in the easement documents, in the county water rights registry. Patricia Cromwell's house was one of the 6. I knew this the day I bought the property. I had my real estate attorney review every page of the title before I signed anything. I understood exactly what I was inheriting, the obligation and the leverage, though I'd never imagined I'd need the second one. For 17 years, I maintained that windmill without complaint. Oil changes, bearing replacements, new vane boards when the old ones cracked. I treated it the way Harold had taught me, with respect, with consistency, with the understanding that water is not a luxury. The neighborhood grew. New families moved in. The original residents who'd been there when the HOA was formed slowly drifted away or passed on, and in their place came people who saw Sycamore Ridge as a status address rather than a community. Patricia Cromwell had moved into the corner lot 6 years ago with her husband, a quiet, deflated accountant named Gerald who seemed to have long since surrendered his opinions to her. And within 8 months, she'd installed herself as HOA president through what I can only describe as a campaign of relentless social pressure. I'd had minor run-ins with her before. A formal warning about my truck being parked in my own driveway at what she deemed an aesthetically inconsistent angle. A strongly worded note about my barn-style mailbox not conforming to the association's unified streetscape vision. I'd ignored both. I had bigger concerns than Patricia's vision of a unified streetscape. But the windmill letter, that was different. That was a declaration. I didn't respond right away. That's the first rule of dealing with people like Patricia. Never show your hand in the opening exchange. Let them feel like they've scored a point. Let them get comfortable. She followed up the letter with a visit 3 days later. I watched her walk up my driveway from the kitchen window, blazer, clipboard, expression that suggested she'd been practicing her authority face in the mirror. I met her at the door before she could knock. Mr. Calloway, she said, I trust you received our notice. I did, and you understand the timeline. 30 days. I understand what the letter said. She looked past me at the windmill, turning slowly in the afternoon breeze. Something in her jaw tightened. That structure is an eyesore. It was never approved by the architectural committee. It depresses property values. Several residents have complained. Which residents? That's confidential. Of course it is. I smiled. Is there anything else? She blinked. She'd expected resistance, maybe even anger, something she could dig her authority into. My pleasantness unsettled her. I want you to know that we're prepared to escalate this matter. The association has legal counsel on retainer. As do I said. Good afternoon, Patricia. I closed the door gently. That evening, I called my attorney. Not out of panic, out of procedure. Her name was Donna Marsh, and she'd handled my property purchase 18 years ago. She still had every document from that transaction in her files, because Donna was the kind of lawyer who treated paperwork the way some people treat heirlooms. You have the easement documents, she asked. Every page. Water Rights Registry. Certified copy. Original deed with Harold Briggs's conditions. Notarized. There was a brief pause on the line, and I could hear the particular silence of someone trying not to laugh. Marcus, she said, if she pushes this, she is going to regret it in ways she cannot currently imagine. I know, I said. I want her to push it. Patricia pushed it. On day 19, I received a second notice. This one was hand-delivered, slipped under my door sometime in the early morning. It informed me that the HOA had filed a complaint with the county zoning office alleging that the windmill was a non-conforming structure in violation of Sycamore Ridge's residential zoning classification and that they had requested a formal inspection. On day 23, a county zoning inspector named Bob Tillery showed up with a clipboard and an apologetic expression. Bob was a decent man doing his job. He walked around the windmill, took measurements, photographed it from several angles. Nice old air motor, he said, almost to himself. 1987, original gearbox. He nodded slowly. You got permits for this. It predates the HOA by 14 years, I said. But yes, I have the original construction permits from the county, issued to Harold Briggs in 1987, and a continuance permit I pulled myself in 2009 during the foundation inspection. I also have it registered as an agricultural water infrastructure asset with the state, which classifies it under a separate regulatory framework than residential architectural structures. Bob stopped writing. He looked up at me over his glasses. Agricultural water infrastructure. The windmill feeds a well that provides secondary water service to 6 residential properties under a recorded easement. Legally, it's utility infrastructure, not a residential structure. The HOA's architectural committee has no jurisdiction over it whatsoever. Bob looked at the windmill. He looked at his clipboard. He looked at me. Sir, he said quietly, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think you have anything to worry about. I know, I said, but thank you for coming out. Bob's report landed on the county zoning office's desk 2 days later. He found no violations. He noted the agricultural infrastructure classification. He recommended the complaint be dismissed. Patricia, I would later learn, called the zoning office 3 times in the following week. Each time, she was told the same thing. The complaint had been dismissed. So she called the police. I was in the backyard, oiling the windmill's gearbox, when the patrol car came down Sycamore Ridge Court. Deputy Harlan Weeks. I knew him from the hardware store, where we discussed lawnmower engines on at least 2 occasions. Climbed out with the expression of a man who already understood he was on a fool's errand. Marcus. He tipped his hat. Harlan, you want some water? I've got a fresh pitcher in the kitchen. He almost smiled. Got a complaint. HOA president says you've got an unauthorized structure and you're operating some kind of commercial water operation without a license. I set down my oil can. Commercial water operation. Her words. Harlan, you want to come inside and look at some documents? We sat at my kitchen table for 20 minutes. I walked him through the easement agreement, the water rights registry, the agricultural infrastructure classification, the county's own inspection report dismissing the zoning complaint. He read carefully, asked 2 clarifying questions, and then sat back in a chair with the look of a man who'd wasted a half tank of gas. "She told me you were running an illegal business," he said. "I'm maintaining a water system that feeds 6 homes, including hers, at no charge to any of them, under a legal obligation recorded in my deed." He rubbed his face. "I'm going to go have a conversation with Ms. Cromwell." "Please do." He left. I watched the cruiser roll to a stop 4 houses down, in front of Patricia's Colonial Revival. I didn't see what happened inside, but I saw Harlan walk back to his car 12 minutes later with the tight jaw of a man who'd been yelled at for telling someone the truth. That afternoon, I called Donna Marsh again. "It's time," I said. "I'll have the letters drafted by morning," she said. Donna sent 3 letters simultaneously. The first went to the Sycamore Ridge HOA board, all 5 members, notifying them that their president had initiated a pattern of harassment against a property owner maintaining legally protected utility infrastructure, and that continued action would result in a lawsuit citing HOA abuse of authority, tortious interference with property rights, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The second letter went to the County Water Authority, formally documenting the easement and requesting that the Windmill fed well be added to the county's secondary water infrastructure registry, a move that would give it additional legal protection and make any interference with it a matter of public utility law. The third letter went to a title insurance company, placing them on notice that there might be a cloud on 6 property titles in Sycamore Ridge resulting from HOA interference with a recorded easement, which would need to be disclosed in any future sale of those properties. That last letter was the one that mattered most, because 3 of the 6 homes connected to my well, including Patricia's, were currently listed or about to be listed for sale. I know this because Sycamore Ridge is a small cul-de-sac, and people talk, and Patricia's neighbor told my neighbor that Patricia had been quietly shopping real estate agents for 2 months, planning to sell and move somewhere more refined. A title cloud doesn't kill a sale immediately, but raises questions. It makes buyers nervous. It makes mortgage lenders nervous. It makes real estate attorneys very interested in the paperwork. Within 72 hours, Donna had received calls from 3 separate real estate attorneys representing sellers and buyers in the cul-de-sac. Within a week, the HOA board had called an emergency meeting. I was not invited, but I found out what happened because Gerald Cromwell, quiet, deflated Gerald, ran into me at the gas station the following Saturday and told me everything with the exhausted relief of a man who'd been waiting years to unburden himself. The emergency HOA board meeting lasted 2.5 hours. Patricia, according to Gerald, arrived with a stack of printed HOA bylaws and a prepared statement about property values and community aesthetics and her moral authority as president. She did not arrive with a real estate attorney or a water rights attorney or anyone who had actually reviewed the documents Donna had filed with the county. The other 4 board members had, or rather, their own attorneys had at their panicked request. The picture those attorneys painted was not flattering. The HOA had harassed a property owner over infrastructure that it had no legal authority to regulate. In doing so, it had triggered a title cloud situation that was now threatening real estate transactions worth a combined $1 million. 2 of the 4 board members were themselves homeowners with properties connected to the well, meaning they had a direct financial interest in the outcome of a dispute their own president had created. One board member, a retired civil engineer named Howard Park, who I'd always found reasonable, reportedly stood up 20 minutes into the meeting and said, quietly but firmly, "Patricia, you didn't check the easement. You didn't check the water rights. You didn't check anything. You filed a complaint with the county based on the windmill being ugly, and now we have a legal exposure problem that is entirely of your making." Patricia, according to Gerald, said that she had relied on the HOA's legal counsel. The HOA's legal counsel, a general practice attorney whose expertise was primarily in contract disputes, said, in a letter read aloud by Howard, that he had advised against the zoning complaint and had not been consulted before the police call. Patricia reportedly went very quiet at that point. The board voted 4-1 to rescind all notices sent to me. The one dissenting vote was Patricia's own. They also voted 4-1 to hire a water rights specialist to formally document the easement and ensure it was correctly reflected in all 6 property titles, a process that would cost the HOA approximately $9,000 from their reserve fund. The legal fees to untangle the title cloud situation would add another $6,000. $15,000 for a windmill she thought was ugly. 2 weeks later, Donna received a formal written apology from the Sycamore Ridge HOA board, signed by all 4 non-Cromwell members. It acknowledged that the notices sent to me had been without legal basis, that the infrastructure on my property was legally protected, and that the HOA had no authority over it. It asked that I consider the matter resolved. I wrote back, through Donna, accepting the apology and confirming I had no intention of pursuing further legal action, provided the HOA adopted a formal policy requiring legal review before filing any regulatory complaint. They agreed. Patricia Cromwell resigned as HOA president 3 days after the board meeting. Gerald told me she'd been asked, firmly, to consider stepping down, and that she'd initially refused, and that Howard Park had responded by noting that he was prepared to call for a formal censure vote, which would be a matter of public record and would become part of the HOA's documents disclosed during any property sale. She resigned the following morning. The house went on the market 6 weeks later. The listing price had been reduced by $40,000. Partly, I was told, because the real estate attorney had advised them that any sophisticated buyer would run a title search that would reveal the history of the HOA dispute, and that transparency was preferable to surprises. I don't know where Patricia Cromwell moved. I don't particularly need to. I do know that on the day the for sale sign went up in front of her colonial revival, I walked out to my backyard, looked up at the air motor turning steadily against the pale October sky, and listened to the water moving in the pipe below, pumping as it had every day for 37 years, into the earth and back up again, patient and reliable and entirely indifferent to the opinions of HOA presidents. I put my hand on the steel frame, still warm from the afternoon sun. Harold Briggs had told me, the day I bought this land, that a water source is the most honest thing a piece of ground can offer you. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't perform. It simply gives what it has, or it doesn't, and you know exactly where you stand. I thought about that a lot those 30 days. I thought about how Patricia Cromwell had looked at this windmill and seen an eyesore. How she'd looked at me and seen someone who would fold under the weight of official-looking letters and uniformed deputies. How she'd looked at her own authority and seen something limitless. She never once looked at the water. The new family that bought Patricia's house moved in on a cold November morning. A couple in their late 30s, 2 kids, a yellow Labrador that immediately claimed the front lawn as his jurisdiction. I brought over a pie, apple, nothing fancy, and introduced myself. The husband, whose name was James, shook my hand and said they'd been told about the well, about the easement, about the windmill. You're the one who maintained all that, he said. For 18 years, I said. He glanced down the street toward the back of my property, where the air motor was just visible above the roofline, turning in the November wind. Does it ever break down? Needs maintenance like anything else, I said, but it's a good machine, built to last. He nodded slowly, the nod of someone who appreciates things built to last. Well, he said, thanks for keeping it going. That's the deal, I said. That's always been the deal. I walked back home. The windmill turned. The water moved. Some things, once properly established, are very difficult to remove. The best revenge isn't loud. It's already running.